Hello, everybody, and welcome to Write Something Weird, your favorite literary show where we talk about creating cool art and building bookish communities. I'm Sophie Stern, a paranormal romance author in Kansas City, and I'm here today with my wonderful guest, Brandon Haffner. Hi, Brandon.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
Hey, I'm great. Thank you so much for being on the show today. I'm really excited to get to talk with you about your work, of which there is a lot. You are a very experienced short story writer, and I'm very curious about this. So, can you talk a little bit about how you approach short stories and how you start those, whether it's with the idea for a character, the plot? What does that look like?
Sure. Well, the honest answer is that it's different for every project. I don't have like a particular habit that I lean on to generate stories. I think things just sort of come to me often. Sometimes that's a place that inspires a whole world. Sometimes it's like a line of dialogue, maybe something I overhear on the street that like starts to grow in my head. Sometimes a weird dream, sometimes a person that I know, and I sort of like do this fun thing where I'll combine characteristics of different folks that I know, and then that becomes a main character. And I'm like, what if I put that character under some pressure? What would happen? And then, the story grows that way.
Yeah.
Um, and then sometimes, I ask my students in classes to write like pieces of flash fiction all the time,
Yeah.
these little pressure cooker exercises, and I always do those alongside them
Oh, cool.
in part because eventually those become stories too. So it kind of depends, but they come from all over the place.
I love that. I like that you write along with your students too. I feel like when we are writing in a room of writers, there's like just this creative energy that always makes
Yes,
me feel inspired. Is that how you are too?
exactly. Yeah, for sure. That's one of the reasons I love going to AWP, the big
Oh,
creative
yeah.
writing
Mhm.
conference, um, or like residencies. And yeah, it's one of my favorite things about teaching for sure. Just being around a bunch of other creative folks who are producing art, it like makes me feel at home.
Yeah, I love that too. And I liked what you said a minute ago about dialogue and eavesdropping on
Yeah.
conversations. Do you have, like, just off the top of your head, like a favorite piece of dialogue that you overheard that like sparked a
Oh
story?
gosh. Oh man, that might take me a second.
Okay, totally fine. While you're thinking, I spoke at a
Hmm.
workshop yesterday in Missouri,
Nice.
and that was one of the things we talked about was how writers are kind of nosy and we love to
Yeah.
like eavesdrop and then use that.
Yeah, I mean, I probably don't like directly steal word for word something that I overhear. It'll just
Yeah.
like spawn an idea and then it'll kind of morph into something more organic. Well,
Okay.
I think one of the reasons I don't do that is it just feels well, first of all, it feels like surveillance, which I don't love. In fact, I had
Fair.
this professor one time in undergrad who would like as an assignment, he would have us go to a coffee shop and transcribe a conversation verbatim that we would overhear. He
Okay.
required us to eavesdrop. And I'm like, this is creepy and makes me feel uncomfortable. I don't want this. Uh, so I think part of it's that reason. Like I just feel weird kind of like transcribing without getting people's permission their
Yeah,
exact
fair.
words. But some of it also is that like if I'm sticking too close to the truth of anything, whether that's dialogue or like, an actual event that I've experienced in my life, I don't really feel like I'm writing fiction anymore.
Yeah.
Um, it's not that I don't respect autofiction. I do. I can't do it. Like if I'm too close to my own experience, I don't feel free to like do the work. I don't know if that
Yeah.
makes sense, but yeah, I don't know. So I think I usually like twist what I overhear a little bit. So I'm actually
Okay.
not sure there's like 100% word for word line in any of my stories that
Yeah.
comes from eavesdropping.
I like that answer a lot. And I'm definitely the same way as a creator. I definitely pull a lot from like casual conversations with other writers or friends. Someone will say something and I think, oh, that's really interesting. And if you take it out of context and plug it into
Hmm.
a story, you could have some fun with it.
Yeah, exactly.
So, along those lines, do you have a favorite short story that you've written?
I think for the longest time I would have said this story, The Bridge Kids, which eventually ended up in the New Orleans Review a few years ago. I was really proud of that story. It got rejected 43 times before it finally
Wow.
found a home.
Yeah.
So, maybe part of that's just like that pride that artists, I
Yeah,
think, have to carry with them about their work,
for
where they
sure.
stubbornly believe in it, even though editors tell them that they don't have a reason to. I always like thought that that story had like a had something, and I was at this workshop in Tbilisi where this guy who was reading it for the first time, he was sort of encouraging me about it. He said that like it contained all these little what he called bullets of energy.
Mhm.
And that I think just that little offhanded comment, I think this speaks to like just like the power of like a little bit of like positive reinforcement when you're
Yeah.
feeling a lot of self-doubt. Um, I don't know, that lifted me and I kept working on that story despite all those rejections, and that's I think why it ended up in a good journal later on. But that's a story with a bunch of kids getting into a bunch of shenanigans on a bougie golf course, which has nothing to do with my upbringing, except that I have like a bunch of very wealthy people far away in my family. I grew up
Okay.
super, super poor.
Yeah.
And I thought it would be fun to kind of like imagine like destroying a golf course, I guess. And like it's about like some kids who steal a golf cart basically. And there are some like warring factions among these like children, and it's kind of like a violent story.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I was a big fan of that for a long time. And then I think more recently, the story The Root that just came out in the Cincinnati Review. I think that would have to be my favorite just because it's recent, maybe.
Yeah, I definitely describe my work very similarly to you. I feel like every time I write a story, that most recent story, I'm like, this is my favorite, like this is the
Yeah,
best. But I
totally.
definitely also have stories where I'm like, this one really stood out. And I like the fact that your golf cart story, I like the fact that even though you went through all of those rejections, you're like, this is pretty solid. This was quite an adventure to write. Sounds like you got to like use your imagination a little bit and push yourself, which is always a really
Yeah.
good feeling.
Yeah, for sure. I wish I could say that I maintained that confidence nonstop, but it was a roller coaster. I mean, anyone who's listening who's a writer, I think, can
Yeah.
recognize that.
Yeah, I feel like most writers, we kind of swing. Most of us aren't
Totally.
even tempered all the time. We're either, I'm amazing, or we're
This
like,
is the
oh, wow,
best, or I'm the worst. Yeah,
I'm
I know.
the worst artist to exist. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about The Root a little bit because that is
Okay.
your newest story. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. Well, okay. So this is a story about this guy Nassim who lives in a very affluent neighborhood. He's got a high-paying lawyer job, but he's kind of terrified of the conditions of his life. Memories of his father who died in front of him kind of haunt him. And he also has a fear of frogs, ornithophobia. Um, and so he kind of walks through his life without thinking very hard about some of the changes that deep down he really wants to make. I think he sort of
Okay.
craves a divorce, he craves a job change, he wants to move, he wants to completely change his life, really, but never really finds the courage to do that. Uh, and the story is also speculative. One of
Mhm.
his friends builds this like thought projection room underneath his pool, and invites invites Nassim down there. And they put a contraption on their heads, and when the contraption is on your head, it like launches your thoughts onto a screen.
Oh,
Um, anyway, and so Nassim, who is like having an affair with the guy who runs this machine's wife, is like has to try really hard to shut those thoughts down when he's in the thought theater.
yeah.
Anyway, so it's a whole mishmash of some stuff, and I think one of the reasons that I'm proud of it is that it doesn't really neatly fit into any one genre. Like I think it borrows elements from science fiction, it borrows elements from some literary realism,
Mhm.
from fantasy, even from like the genre that we now call the new weird, that some folks
Mhm.
call the new weird. Um, but I don't really know that it neatly fits into any of those categories,
Yeah.
which I'm really happy about because I'm trying to get weirder and stranger all the time in
Yeah.
my own writing.
That's really cool. So did you have like a starting point for this story? Like, was it what would happen if my thoughts were projected? Or what if I was, afraid of frogs? Like, how did that start?
I think it started. there are two ways of answering this question. I wrote a story a really long time ago, maybe I was like 19 or 20 years old, that was all about like a thought theater and that like evolving technology. But I was 19 or 20, so it was not very good. And but I always thought that was kind of something interesting there. And then
Yeah.
in the summer of 2023, I was in residency at the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, and I didn't bring my phone with me. So I had no access to the internet uh, for about 3.5 weeks. And that kind of my brain was like the most active that it had been in
Wow.
years, and I would say probably since also. I think because I didn't have access to the internet and I was working on a novel project and was getting a little bit fatigued with the novel project. And for some reason, that old story about that thought theater like kind of came back to me and
Yeah.
merged with some of the environment that I was in. Because I had no phone to distract me, when I needed a break, I would just take a walk around the premises, and there was a pool where a bunch of frogs would gather. And the frogs kind of reminded me, I had a fiance at the time, and she had rhinophobia,
Okay.
which, for a long time just made me feel weird about frogs. I had never felt weird about frogs before
Yeah.
dating this person, but then they started to like disturb me a little bit because I knew that they scared her. I was
Yeah.
always like on the lookout for frogs to try to like, shield her eyes so that she didn't have to like experience that like terror.
Interesting.
And um, so yeah, I think something about all of that and my relationship with my fiance were like things were changing really fast at that time. So
Mm.
all of those things kind of like meshed together, and I like abandoned my novel project and just fully focused on this
Yeah.
story.
That is really interesting. And I love what you're saying about like our relationships with other people and how that can impact our writing.
Definitely.
'Cause yeah, I've never thought about, having to like shield someone from seeing like a frog. I've
Hmm.
done it with like a spider, of course.
Hmm.
Like a lot of people are scared of spiders, but I love that you had something that feels unique, something that your readers are probably like, wait a second, what would that actually look like? Where would a frog appear? Like, that's definitely a really interesting question. And it sounds like it played a really interesting role in the story.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of those things that generate a high emotion, like especially fear, I guess,
Yeah.
given the subject of that story, just sort of made sense. Those are like always lurking, and I will occasionally just like tap into those. I mean, often I'm not doing that consciously,
Yeah.
um, but like memories or events from my past, or just situations I'm experiencing that had a high degree of emotion, I'll just like pair those with fictional situations so that the
Mhm.
the situation I'm writing feels like authentic or true.
Yeah. And I love when we can pull from our own history like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
Because yeah, if we feel that emotion, it's easier to shove it into a story.
Yeah.
Um, I write a lot of vampire lit, and I love when I can take something that, I've experienced or a friend has experienced and be like, what if we had a vampire who was scared of frogs? What if,
Right.
what if he felt insecure about something? How can I twist that and play with it?
Yeah.
And it sounds like so I view writing as play a lot, and I'm getting the vibe that you kind of feel that way too.
Absolutely. I feel like if I don't do that, then the writing comes off as like stiff and dry and I'm bored with
Yeah.
it. It has to feel playful and like or like I'm exploring something,
Yeah,
like I'm discovering.
absolutely. And I love that process of writing where we get to discover.
Yeah.
When you were working on the route, did you learn anything new about yourself or your writing process? Was there anything that surprised you as you were working on the story?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I think this story, it just came out, so it's kind of hard to say, but it
Yeah.
feels to me in my writing journey like a benchmark. Um, because I felt free to do that thing I was describing earlier, where I was kind of combining elements of different genres with abandon. Um, I
Yeah.
think one thing I so I'm a tenured professor now, right? But I grew up with no resources. My we had like no money at all. We grew up in like a trailer park, and then we had just financially it was a happy childhood, but financially it was
Yeah.
it was really difficult. Uh, So I think ideas of like becoming a tenured professor were very abstract and I think just not, it didn't feel realistic to me at all.
Yeah.
So when I did finally get into an MFA program, it took me a couple of different years of applications to do that. Uh, and then landed a couple of decent contingent positions and then finally got on the tenure line. Whenever I was writing fiction, I had the pressure of career kind of in the back of my mind all the
Mm.
time. And as you probably know, and as a lot of listeners probably know, the conventions of workshops are only recently changing from a very like white heteronormative realism. I didn't see a single speculative story in my MFA workshop,
Wow.
whether like as a published model or from any of my peers, not a single
Mhm.
one over 2 years. I don't remember seeing any when I was an undergrad either. Like I said, I think those norms are finally changing.
Yeah.
But it took me a long time to convince myself that like editors at these journals that would mean something in my on my CV to help me get,
Yeah.
a tenure line job and then to get tenure, would take speculative work seriously. It took a
Yeah.
lot of like I think internal convincing that I could still do that. So um, once I got tenure, I think my approach to writing fiction changed a lot, and it's
Okay.
given me some confidence and freedom.
Yeah.
So this story to me, I think represents like a shift where I can actually start to like truly unlearn some of those
Yeah.
restricting norms that I absorbed in those early workshops and become the writer that I have always wanted to be and write things that represent what I like to read.
Yeah. That's amazing. And I love the idea of this story representing freedom. I think that's
Yeah,
really
yeah,
cool. A lot of writers, I think, especially as we do go through like the workshops or like in our undergrad programs, a lot of us do absorb like the rules of
hmm
writing and what you can do and what you can't do. And
yeah,
so breaking free of those is harder in some ways, I think, than a lot of us imagine it to be.
absolutely it is. Yeah, well, especially when your career depends on
Yeah,
on publication, it was hard not to write toward my impression of an editor's expectations.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And it's really interesting to have, I know a lot of writers do have like a day job and having that,
hmm
having your art not necessarily tied to that career can be very freeing.
Yes,
And it's interesting because I feel like sometimes that freedom helps us produce like the best work we've ever made. And then
exactly.
and then it's great.
Yeah, yeah, I know. In some ways, I felt like a better writer before I got into an MFA program. Well, I mean, that's not really fair. I learned a lot in my MFA
I
program,
know what
but
you mean.
yeah, like to your point, I felt like a freer writer, I think, before
Yeah.
I got into the business. And then for 10 years, I think was writing in a very different way than I am now.
Yeah. So, along those lines, you don't just write, you also edit for Variant Lit.
Mhm.
Uh, what's the big difference between creating something yourself and nurturing something of someone else's?
You know, I think it's actually not that much different from when I'm doing my process correctly. I think when I'm at my best, I'll do that thing that a lot of folks tell us to do where I'll make a messy first draft and then I know it's not ready, so I literally print it off and put it in a physical drawer and don't look at it
Okay,
for months. And then when I
interesting.
come
Cool.
back to it, I feel almost like, like a reader might who stumbled across that story. That's the goal anyway, is to sort of
Yeah,
simulate what the experience would be like coming across that story as a stranger to it. So I think editing for Variant kind of simulates that process a little bit. Like it just sort of feels the story becomes, I get emotionally invested in it.
yeah.
Variant's super cool in the way that they're run. You only edit stories that you personally as an editor are like really excited about.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Um, yeah, so the story becomes like collaborative between
Yeah.
me and the author. I think when I'm the author and an editor who's excited about my work, in the other way, it feels similar. So I've sort of modeled my editing process on like the journals that I think have done the best job with my work, like Adam
Mhm.
Ross at the Swanee Review or here, Lisa at Cincinnati Review. They're very, very attentive, and
Yeah.
they really want the best for the story. It sort of becomes both of ours. So I sort of try to approach it the same way. Um, and yeah, I don't know, because I read it over it many, many times. It just kind of feels like a nice collaborative effort. And I think it's actually kind of similar to the late stages
Yeah.
of revision for my own work.
I love that idea of viewing it as collaborative. And I think a lot of writers are very scared to work with editors
Totally.
because they're
Yes.
afraid
Noticed.
they're afraid of like losing that autonomy and losing that
Yeah.
like they don't want to lose the heart of their story.
Right.
I've worked with many editors over the years, and as you were saying, like a great editor is going to bring a new perspective, but they're going to care so deeply. They're going to be asking questions like, how can this be stronger? How can we make this
Right.
even better or punchier or more interesting or more weird?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and also I think editors have to understand there is like a line past which the author usually I think has like a at least a better understanding of their original ambitions. And then the editor's
Mhm.
job is to kind of like shape the story to meet those original ambitions,
Yeah.
rather than to like impose their own vision. But I don't really stumble across those editors very much who like try to encroach with their
Yeah.
own vision on a story. I think most
Good.
editors are they want to listen to the author,
Yeah.
um, and help them reach their goals.
Yeah. I love that. Well, speaking of stories, you wrote a story called The Color of Turtles, which I
Mhm.
really love. This was a really fun one.
Thanks.
This story is a piece of flash fiction, but it's really, really layered, and you pack so much into such a small space. What was your favorite thing about writing this?
That story was kind of like an apology letter to my little brother. Because
I got
you know,
that.
yeah, I was a little bit of a butthead as a big brother sometimes growing up. So
Mhm.
this story kind of like roughly approximates, what like I in this story, the narrator, his older brothers like kind of pick on him in a variety of ways, but one of the things that they do is they like steal his turtle and they put it in a stream, and then the turtle vanishes forever. Don't worry, I never did that. That's not a thing I would ever have done. uh, but I think I was just like exploring what it would have felt like to be
Yeah.
a younger brother who was grew up in a household where he didn't really feel like he belonged.
Yeah.
He was like not an athlete when his older brothers were athletes. His interests were always different from everybody else's. So, um, I don't know if that really answers your question. It wasn't exactly like a joyful story to work on because it was coming from probably like a place of like remorse or guilt even.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, yeah, but I don't know. It felt like an important story to write, I guess, and it
Yeah.
started much bigger. Like a lot of my flash pieces, it started much bigger, and then I kind of whittled it down to its just crucial essence.
As a reader, I felt like I was a kid again reading it.
Mm.
I feel like you did a really nice job capturing like the relationships between siblings. I'm also an older sibling. I've eight younger brothers and sisters, so
Oh wow.
big, big family. But I really liked the way that you were able to bring together those different relationships and kind of play with that within the story. Also, very glad that you did not actually steal a turtle.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if I had done something like that, I probably wouldn't have written a story about it. I probably just sort of like tucked that under the rug.
Yeah, probably don't want the printed confession.
Yeah, that would have been more like a real apology letter.
That's fair. That's fair. I like it. Brandon, before we say goodbye, what's a piece of advice that you would give to writers who want to write flash fiction or short type fiction?
I'm probably not the best person to give advice on that. I don't really consider myself a flash fiction writer first. I think all of my flash fiction pieces are accidents. I'm
Interesting.
usually, I have multiple novel projects going right now. I have multiple novella projects, and the bulk of the work that I make is, minimum 15 pages.
Yeah.
And so a lot of my flash pieces come when a short story is just like not working. Um,
Okay.
And then just as a way of sprucing it up, I'll isolate a moment that I feel like is generating the most energy and try it out as something much shorter. I sometimes write poetry. I don't really send it out very much, but one of the things I think is fun about Flash is to combine the obligations to precise, vivid language
Mhm.
that I feel when I write poetry, um, with ideas of narrative. I think when I'm talking to my students about writing Flash, I'll often tell them to like help to feel free of the conventions that we feel um, are necessary in longer narrative, like
Yeah,
Freytag's Pyramid, for example. You can throw that stuff out the window, I think, with Flash. I mean, personally, I think you can throw that stuff out the window with any length of fiction. That's me. Um, but I think Flash can be much more impressionistic. And
yeah,
people are doing all sorts of wild and experimental and fun stuff with Flash. So I
yeah,
think all the stuff we've been talking about throughout this conversation, actually, about kind of
yeah,
untethering yourself from outside expectations, Flash is a uniquely happy playground, I think, for
yeah.
trying that out.
I love that. I like what you said about finding part of your story that has the most energy,
Hmm.
but also the idea that not every story fits the medium we thought it would.
Absolutely.
So that's like a really great takeaway, I think.
Cool.
Absolutely. Well, Brandon, thanks so much for your time today. This was really fun and happy writing.
Yeah, thank you. What a great chat.